President Obama is still seeing low favorability ratings in New York, but voters seem to like him more than his potential opponents at this point. According to a new Siena poll, only 47% of New Yorkers say that they will vote to re-elect Obama, while 47% say that they would actually prefer someone else. However, when matched up against the Republican candidates Mitt Romney or Rick Perry, those frontrunners so far, Obama leads by at least 20 points. It's kind of curious, actually. Joining me now to discuss these conflicting results and what they might mean for the president is Steve Greenberg. He is the spokesman for the Siena, New York poll.
Good to be with you, Liz.
Nice to see you. This isn't so terribly different from the last poll that you had on this one, so I don't know if the president should take heart that he's not fallen any further in a blue state like New York, or really be distressed by the fact, or as James Carville would say, that he really should get nervous and fire some people.
Well, I think this is a good news, bad news poll for the president. Look, let's put it in perspective. This is a state with a 2-to-1 Democratic enrollment edge over Republicans. 49% of the enrolled voters here are Democrats, only 25% are Republicans. This is a state that has not voted for a Republican in a presidential election in nearly 3 decades, since Ronald Reagan's re-election in 1984.
And it's not the same, even though the economy and no president has actually been re-elected with the unemployment rate over 9% like we're seeing. It's not the same state as it was when Reagan was elected here.
No, it's not. It's actually more Democratic now than it was back then. So the bad news is for the president that in a vacuum, without Republican opposition, he's not very strong. You gave some of the numbers. His job performance rating is even worse. Only 40% of voters think he's doing a positive job as president. 60% think he's doing a negative job. So the president's got problems. Where the good news comes in for the president is when he's matched up against Republicans. And it's not just the Republican presidential candidates. As you said, he's got a 23-point lead over Perry. He's got a 20-point lead over Romney right now. But we also asked a couple of questions on the economy, on jobs. Who do you think's got a better plan? Who's going to do better for getting the country out of it? Obama or the Republican leadership in Congress? And there they side with Obama over the Republican leadership. Look, the favorability numbers on Congress are even worse than they are for the president by a long shot.
It's been that way for a while, though.
Absolutely.
And certainly since the debt ceiling mess, and now we're seeing the showdown over FEMA funding and stopgap measure in Washington, it seems to be more of the same negative partisan sniping, et cetera, with Congress. And really, it's like Carter-esque almost, right? If you can't work with Congress, you can't get anything done from the White House.
That's exactly right. And I mean, you know, there's the analogy that some have made to what's going on in New York and the way Cuomo has tried to deal with the state legislature versus the way Obama's tried to deal with Congress. We also have the analogies to 1948 and Harry Truman, where Obama's trying to set up this election for next year as a, hey, I'm trying to get the job done, but it's that do-nothing Congress, it's that partisan Congress, it's that evil Congress that's blocking us. And I'm not sure if that would be effective or not, but it's an interesting gambit 14 months out, particularly in the absence of actually having a Republican opponent.
Right. You actually asked people how they felt in regards to certain statements that you posed to them, that you had your poll workers' polls. One of them was, he was a great candidate, but right now Barack Obama is a poor president. 47% of the folks you spoke to agreed with that statement. 49% disagreed with that statement. You know, it's interesting because he really was an electrifying candidate.
No question.
For so many reasons. Breaking the racial barrier. Obviously, he was a freshman in the Senate. He was a newcomer. He had this big idea about hope, etc.
Hope and change, and he was young. I mean, it was almost Kennedy-esque to a certain point. Young, dynamic, changing, passing the torch to the new leadership. He even talked about that during the campaign and brought the Kennedys into the campaign.
Right.
So, yeah. I think most people, even most Republicans, agree that he was a great candidate. But now we have nearly half of New Yorkers saying, yeah, he was a great candidate, but he's a poor president. That was the worst that Obama did in this series of 6 statements that we read to voters. The best he did was where 3/4 of voters think that he has really tried to get Democrats and Republicans to work together in Washington. And on all the other statements, Obama does okay. I mean, voters don't think he's too weak a leader. They don't think his policies are wrong for America. They do think he's had accomplishments so far.
So what's the problem then? What's the problem?
The problem is that we are now into the 3rd year of this recession. The economy is doing miserably. People are concerned about their own jobs, their families' jobs, their neighbors' jobs. And when he first came in, he didn't own the economy. Now he owns it. He's 2.5 years into this presidency. Voters are taking it out on him. And we had another finding in this poll. 55% of voters are very concerned that we're going to have a double-dip recession.
Yeah.
Another 29% are somewhat concerned, but more than half of every party, every region of the state are very concerned. Well, Obama owns that now because he's the president.
Yeah, and this idea about the American Jobs Plan, this is sort of, the Republicans say it's another stimulus, but he says that it's going to actually reinvigorate the economy. You know, despite the fact that his mantra has been pass this plan now to Congress, New Yorkers are like, nah, we don't even really, like, what's in this thing again? I mean, nearly half of them say they don't have enough information about it. So maybe Congress, in dragging its feet, is actually being wise.
Well, it's interesting. We got a little bit of a conflict from the voters there. 2/3 of voters say they are either very or somewhat familiar with the plan, yet when we ask them, do they want Congress, do they support or oppose Congress passing it, as you say, nearly half, 47% told Sienna that they don't have enough information. They want to know more. Among those who have an opinion, 33% say Congress should pass it, 19% said Congress should not pass it.
Well, and the other thing is, before you finish that thought, I just want to wrap up the idea regarding Obama. If the Republicans had a stronger candidate, then perhaps we would be seeing, I mean, they're still talking about Chris Christie. I mean, there are still some folks there who say, despite the fact that he said, no, 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 I'm not interested this time around, there are still folks trying to draw him in, which means that there's a fair amount, even in the Republican side of things, of dissatisfaction with the choices out there.
Right, no question. And look, the Republican primary process is the opposite of the Democratic primary process. The Democrats wind up running to the left to get through the primaries. In the Republican primary process, they run to the right, as you well know. That doesn't play well in New York. In New York, they're looking for a more moderate Republican.
Right.
An ultra-conservative Republican is not going to win in New York, whereas a moderate Republican can potentially make it interesting. On those 6 questions where we asked voters to agree or disagree, we did some cluster analysis, a fancy polling term, but essentially what we tried to do is look at all 6 of those questions together and see how voters responded. What we find is that 47% of New York voters right now are strongly in the Obama camp. So he starts with a pretty good base, just under 50%. 27% are strongly Obama opponents. There is no way the president ever gets their support. 26% are fence-sitters. So right now, the president is in line to carry New York. That doesn't look like it's in jeopardy. But if there's a strong Republican opponent who appeals to independents, moderate Democrats in New York, if New York is ever in play in this presidential election next year, then that really spells bad news for the president nationally. And when we ask voters, who do you think's going to win next year? 45% say they think Obama's going to get reelected. 42% say the GOP candidate, unnamed as of yet, is likely to win the election next year.
But equally troubling, and we'll take it out on this, independents believe that a Republican will be taking the oath of office. Independents tend to be a key area where the president has lost a lot of support, eroded across the country. And if he doesn't get those independents, he's really in trouble. Oh,
no question about it. And look, we see it in independents in New York. Right now, on his favorability rating, among independent voters alone, 44% favorable, 52% unfavorable. He's underwater on his favorability with independents. Just last month, he had a 55-43 favorability rating with independents.
Right. So, interesting. We will, of course, be tracking this because that's what pollsters do.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you very much, Steve Greenberg, for being here.